Well, we have a real treat. We haven't talked to Siim Land for a while. He's written a massive book. It's called The Longevity Leap. And if you have any interest in longevity, I think you'll be intrigued with this book, as it's about 800 pages with the references. There's 8,000 references. It's an extraordinary amount of references. So he's done his due diligence and created a tome of helpful information about how to stay healthy and age gracefully. So you're going to be intrigued. A lot of the topics we talk about, like protein restriction and carbohydrate needs, and a lot of things you may have thought about and not really understood very well. So hopefully you'll enjoy this quite a bit.
Traditionally, longevity research has been focused a lot on things like calorie restriction and protein restriction, and even like carbohydrate restriction. So you're like, the practical outcome would be that you're eating like very small amounts of food and you're becoming very frail and skinny. But in the actual world, we're starting to see right now is that frailty is a huge risk factor for early death and mortality, and malnutrition itself also increases the risk of a lot of different diseases, all-cause mortality and neurodegeneration and heart disease even. So right now, I think the field has started to appreciate a lot more of these tangible, practical, functional outcomes like muscle strength and body composition and VO2 max and just these other biomarkers that move more from the theoretical side of biological aging and moving more towards into the idea of slowing down this age-related decline in physical function and cognitive function that does increase the risk of mortality. So I think it's a good perspective because we can't or we shouldn't talk about extending maximum lifespan with protein restriction or calorie restriction if we die to something like frailty in our 70s or 80s. So first we have to make sure that we don't die in our 70s and 80s before we can talk about extending lifespan beyond 100 and 120 years of age.
Welcome, everyone. Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today we're going to talk to Siim Land, who is written a new book, The Longevity Leap, and it is quite a monster. It's hard to imagine that in less than a year he's compiled this book, but he has. It's over 500 pages and not 1,000 references, not 2, not 3, not 4, not even 5,000 references, 8,000 references. The reference list is longer than most books. So he's backed it up, and it's a lot of information. I've always been impressed with Siim. I think I've met him. When did I meet you, Siim, first? It was like 5-6 years ago. I know exactly where it was, and I know exactly where we're standing. We were standing in front of someone's booth.
Quicksilver.
I can
Scientific.
see it. Quicksilver, that's what it was. Yeah, and it was a good friend of mine.
In
yeah, and I said, oh, yeah, it was great. So you've been extraordinary. You're a real leader in the field, and not only in just explaining things, but doing it. You're not a hypocrite. You actually implement these programs. And you're a stellar example of taking good care of your biology. And I think you've done your biological age. And what are you, like 4 or 5 years old?
So, yeah, I'm chronologically 29. I'm going to be 30 in 2 months. And I did my organ age test, which was 17. And my liver out of those markers was 9. So that was the lowest. So my liver is 9 years old.
I wasn't too far off.
Yeah.
Pretty extraordinary. I'm not sure that I believe those. And maybe we can start there because, there's one ways. I mean, there's a number of different ways that you can use. And certainly early on, we had telomeres, which are the end caps of the chromosomes. And the theory at that time was telomere attrition is associated with a decrease in longevity. Mm. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, there are these new epigenetic age tests and biological age tests that have been around for, maybe 10 years. And you're right. I wouldn't put a lot of emphasis on them. There's a lot of confounding variables that can affect those results. And at the same time, we don't know necessarily what does it mean if you have a liver of a 9-year-old. So, does it mean that you're going to live exponentially longer than someone else? We don't have that data yet. So it's kind of, interesting tests and markers, but there's just not that much information about, what's what does, and the problem is also like that a lot of these different tests use different algorithms to make, and they look at different markers, the DNA methylation markers. So yeah, I wouldn't like put a lot of like emphasis on the tests themselves.
Yeah.
Much rather I would look at like the traditional biomarkers like glucose, inflammation, and cholesterol, and those other things. But yeah, but regarding like telomeres, then telomere attrition is one of the major hallmarks of aging. It's much rather that the speed of how fast they shorten, that's found to be linked to like different health problems, instead of the total length of them. So like the speed of the
Mhm.
attrition is kind of more important. And the same with the
Yeah.
biological age tests. So DNA methylation is also one of those things that changes with age. So it is like a legitimate hallmark of aging that these biological age tests measure. Is might be like too early to like make a lot of conclusions about them.
Yeah, I agree. So there's been many, let's call them kindly mistakes made about longevity and aging historically. And I think that might be an interesting place to start. So, what do you think about some of those mistakes? What would you highlight as some of the biggest ones?
Mm, yeah. So traditionally, longevity research has been focused a lot on things like calorie restriction and protein restriction, and even like carbohydrate restriction. So you're like so like the practical outcome would be that you're eating like very small amounts of food and you're becoming very frail and skinny. But the in the actual world, we're starting to see right now is that frailty is a huge risk factor for early death and mortality, and
Hmm.
malnutrition itself also increases the risk of a lot of different diseases, all cause mortality, and neurodegeneration and heart disease even. So right now, I think the field has started to appreciate a lot more of these tangible, practical, functional outcomes like muscle strength and body composition and VO2 max and just these other biomarkers that move more from the like the theoretical side of biological aging, which is mostly done on like these model organisms and mouse studies, which is where like these calorie restriction and protein restriction studies are done on, and moving more towards into the idea of slowing down this age-related decline in physical function and cognitive function that does increase the risk of mortality. So I think it's a good perspective because we can't or we shouldn't talk about extending maximum lifespan with protein restriction or calorie restriction if we die to something like frailty in our 70s or 80s. So first we have to make
Hmm.
sure that we don't die in our 70s and 80s before we can talk about extending lifespan beyond 100 and 120 years of age. So yeah, I think right now we're at a point where many people aren't afraid of protein, many people aren't afraid of calories either. So the research about calorie restriction, I think it is good to not be obese and not be overweight. For men, it appears to be better to be on the leaner side, but if we are too skinny or too frail with too low muscle mass, then that is also like a big risk factor for early death. And the same applies to protein. Like protein mechanistically could be linked to faster aging in animal studies, but in human studies, it's again like if you eat too low protein, then you're increasing the risk of frailty and low muscle mass. And with
Yeah.
carbohydrates as well, like it's very commonly thought that eating too many carbs is going to be bad for your health. At least in observational studies, it's the opposite. So like
Hmm.
40 to 55% of calories as carbohydrates is linked to the lowest risk usually. I wouldn't say that eating
Hmm.
less is inherently harmful, but it just contradicts the idea that eating zero carb is the best way to go for longevity. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
other reasons.
There's a common argument, I think most accurately ascribed to by Tim Noakes, who I interviewed, I think earlier this year, who's a legit scientist and long distance runner and low carb advocate. And what he believes and teaches is that your carbohydrates are not required for nutrition because it's not essential for your health because your body makes it. That is one of the most fatally flawed concepts of health I've ever heard.
Mm,
But they believe it truly that you can do this and you can survive without carbohydrates, but you will not thrive. It's physically impossible.
right.
Before we go, I want to dive into the carbs. So I think it's important, and I would like to hear your perspective on it. I think I know I did maybe 10, 15 years ago. Uh, Listen to one of the people who taught me about insulin resistance and sensitivity that I really appreciated, Dr. Ron Rosedale. but he veered off into this mTOR fear, and I think he was probably one of the main leaders of this fear of protein. And I bought it, and after a while, I understood that was not true. After I adopted it and realized it was not producing health, so you need a certain amount of protein. And I think you are accurate that most people are not afraid of protein, but there is a danger of taking too much protein. This is Goldilocks dose, just like you described with or mentioned with the carbs. There's too little or too much is not good either.
Right.
So, are you of the belief that 0.8 grams of protein per pound, because mostly have an American audience, of course you can convert that to kilograms, but 0.8 grams of protein per pound for lean body mass would be close to ideal, because there's not much benefit, especially an anabolic benefit, if you're getting more, and there's a downside because you can harm your kidney function.
Yeah, so like with protein, the functional purpose of why you're eating protein is to maintain muscle mass and build it and slow down this age-related sarcopenia. So that's kind of pretty much the only reason, or the primary reason you want to eat the right amount of protein. And if you eat too much, then that could be problematic from the perspective of kidney health and homocysteine levels. And if you're eating too little, then that's the risk of the sarcopenia and frailty. So I think the data is pretty clear that anything more than 0.8 grams per pound or 1.6 grams per kilogram of lean mass isn't going to increase muscle mass more. So that's the kind of maximum benefit you get for muscle growth. Now, is it the best for longevity? I think there's no that specific data about that in such a long time frame for longevity. So I think if you are someone who is, let's say, worried about muscle loss and wants to maintain good fitness and good muscle strength, which are very important for longevity, then I don't think you can go wrong with the 0.8 grams per pound of lean mass. Now, the thing is that it's linked to lean mass. So that's the difference between total mass and fat mass and lean muscle tissue. So in reality, so if you're 10% body fat and you weigh 180 pounds, then that 0.8 grams per pound of lean mass of that would be something, I can't do the calculation immediately, but
162.
Yeah, something like that. So you don't need the entire total body weight, and the higher your body fat percentage, the less protein you technically need as well. But the argument at the same time is also that if you eat more, then that can help with satiety, and you can lose weight faster with a high protein diet. In the short term, I think it's probably fine. But maybe chronically for years and years of eating a diet that is 2 grams per kilograms or 1 gram per pound for no other apparent reason might not be the most optimal. So I think some moderate intake of protein and kind of hedging your bets against this age-related sarcopenia by aiming for this 0.8 grams per pound of lean body mass.
Okay, good. Thank you for expanding on that. So, interestingly, in the next month or so, I'm going to be launching my book too, which I started much later than September, but I started mine, I think, in March or April. But it's not as long as yours. It's only 350 pages and has less than half the references. But what I've done with the references is put links to full text articles. Which so that people can download the full text, and and when it's not available on PubMed, I've found other sources that you can get the full text. So, but if you download all the articles, it's like 45,000 pages.
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, it's actually the unified theory of health for ultimate longevity and joy. So in many ways, it's similar to your book. So we're writing the same book at the same time. We've been doing pretty similarly. We kind of, we've not copied each other. We're clearly, but we're aligned pretty similarly on parallel paths. So what I wanted to discuss and get your insights as to what you believe is the single most important cause that contributes to optimizing longevity. If you can nail one factor down, what would you believe it is? Or what do you believe it is?
Yeah. So as a single, I guess a single point, I would say that maintaining biological youth is kind of would be
Hmm.
my answer, because like when you're young, in your teenage years and your 20s, you have the lowest risk of all cause mortality, you have the lowest risk of Alzheimer's, lowest risk of cancer
But how do
and
you do that?
heart disease.
How do you do that?
Yeah, so that kind of goes into the practical side. So there's no like, there's a lot of different methods. So like some people age slower, some people age faster.
Mhm.
Lifestyle is a huge factor to that as well. Genetics, of course, plays a huge role as well. I would say that, it's hard to say like the single activity to maintain this lower biological youth, but as a combination, you would have to do like the lifestyle, the diet, maybe some supplements that can help with that, sleep, stress management, those kind of things. Probably the single most powerful thing for biological aging is moderate exercise. So just maintaining physical activity, it just targets all the hallmarks of aging in a positive way. It improves all the organ function, and it also improves the risk of all these chronic diseases as well. So it kind of targets everything that you need to do when it comes to slowing down biological aging. Of course, there is the problem of too much exercise, so you have to find like a sweet
Mhm.
spot for that. But as a single activity, probably exercise. If you don't do anything else but you exercise, you would see the majority of the benefits from that.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And we've both been strong advocates of exercise most of our lives. I started exercising 55 years ago, which is well before you were born, and have never stopped. I've never really taken more than a few days off for any reason, and never had really any injuries. So I couldn't agree more. But I'm really delighted that you focused on one word when you described exercise, and that was the word moderate.
Mm.
Because there is a danger if you overexercise. And we shared some email dialogues back and forth last year when O'Keefe wrote his article in the uh, about exercise and the J curve and what happens when you overexercise. And it's not just exercise in general. He went down to the very specifics,
Mm.
which is what I dialogue with you because I see you as a great embracer of resistance training, and as I was too. But I've really, after that's review that he published, it lightened me up a bit to understand that excessive resistance training probably is not your best strategy.
Mm.
And however, the converse is not true for walking. You can essentially walk
Right.
like 10, 20 hours a week and be fine. It's really hard to overdo walking. You can overdo everything, almost anything, but most people are never going to overdo walking.
Yeah.
Um, but you can easily overdo resistance training. So why don't you? And you're just a phenomenal biological specimen of mastering your muscle growth. I mean, you're just not only muscle growth, but human performance. I mean, you're like I think some of the people with the best bodies are gymnasts. They have that strength and they have the good body, but they have the mobility and the
Right.
flexibility. So and I think you're qualifying that category. So why don't you give us your view on it?
Yeah, so the review that you mentioned by O'Keefe last year, that also changed a lot of my view on exercise, that I've like adjusted my workout plans accordingly. And what they found, so they looked at the biggest studies over the last few years, and they kind of gave rough estimates or the guidelines. Okay, what is linked to the lowest risk of all cause mortality and the lowest risk of heart disease? When it came to moderate physical activity, so that's 40 to 60% of your max heart rate. So that can be walking, brisk walking, hiking, walking with a weighted vest, and maybe like slow jogging or cycling. And they found that the association with all cause mortality and heart disease was linearly, the more moderate activity you did, the lower your risk, even to the point of 900 minutes per week. So you can do like 10, 20 hours of moderate activity per week, and it appears to reduce your risk in a linear fashion. When it came to vigorous exercise, so that's something like 80 to 90% of your max heart rate, that can be HIIT cardio, interval work, resistance training technically is here as well. Or there might be some nuances there, but yeah, just higher intensity exercise. They found for heart disease mortality, at least, there was a J-shaped association. So not doing any resistance training and this vigorous activity was associated with an increased risk. The sweet spot was somewhere between like 140 to 160, maybe up to 200 at most minutes per week. And after that, you started to see an increased risk of heart disease. And so in practice, that would entail something like 3 workouts per week for 45 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Well, can we stop here because sorry for interrupting, but I think this is the challenge that most people have with this work is that it was really never understood. I interviewed O'Keefe on this, and I don't think he really understood it either. But I'm wondering what your take is because you probably know more about this than O'Keefe. What you said the minutes, the range to 140, 160, 180, maybe 200, but what are because you can be in the gym and work out continuously, or you can take like 5-minute breaks between sets. So what are you counting as minutes of working out?
Yeah, I think that's a limitation of this study. So yeah, like you could have 5 to 10 minute breaks like a power lifter, and you can only lift 3 reps, would take you like 1 minute to do, or you could do this short rests and back to back drop sets, supersets kind of a workout. So it's hard to say, okay, which one applies here. So is the powerlifting workout, is it categorized here, or these are people who show those associations where they actually literally working out 45 minutes in a row with weights? So I think that's a problem right now. I think we would need future trials to see to control for this. In my opinion, if you're doing a lot of rest in between sets, so you're resting 5 minutes in between your sets with weightlifting, like these deadlifts and squats, then I would say that probably you'll be able to do a little bit more than this 150 to 200 minutes per week, because you're resting so long in between those in between those sets. So your heart rate goes down to 50% probably by the end of that 5 minute rest period. But if you are working out with shorter rest and you're doing a set every 1 to 2 minutes, then probably that categorizes as an entire period in the high intensity zone, because your heart rate pretty much stays at least 70% all the time, so to say. So I think the way you do that weightlifting matters. And for example, gymnasts, they also train for hours. They do the skill development, which is that they do one skill on the rings or the parallel bars, but it lasts for 10 to 20 seconds where they are in the high intensity zone, or if they do a somersault or a backflip, whatever they're doing. So it's a very short period of high intensity, and the rest of the time they're resting and resting for 10 minutes almost. So it matters kind of training you're doing. So it's hard to say how much you should do if you're training as a powerlifter. But maybe if you are having longer rest periods, then maybe it's 250 minutes per week. But if you're having shorter rest periods, then 150 minutes probably is kind of the sweet spot.
So for most people, it's not going to be a big issue because they're not too concerned about over exercising. They're not even in the gym at all. But for those of us who are, it's a concern. So with this new information, I mean, I used to work out 5 days a week. It's now down to 3 days a week for resistance training. That's it. Now, at least a full blown hour workout. Now I do minor 10-minute, just mostly stretching and maybe some pull-ups and dips, and that's about it. Nothing aggressive. So I do it. So it's about 180 minutes a week, I think. How have you modulated your workouts?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I'm doing about 180, maybe 200, 150 to 180 minutes of resistance training. And I'm training 3 times a week, and I'm cycling between upper body, lower body, or push pull leg split. So I'm doing the main compound lifts or gymnastics, this calisthenics exercises. And I still add once a week, maybe once every 2 times a week, once every 2 weeks, I'll add a high intensity interval workout as well. So I'll do a 4-minute interval at around this 80 to 90% max heart rate for 4 minutes, repeat for 4 rounds, rest 4 minutes in between. So that's a 32-minute high intensity workout. But I'm doing that to really boost my VO2 max right now. So I'm trying to increase my VO2 max because that's also very powerfully linked to longevity, and I'm trying to milk the period where I have a high VO2 max for as long as possible.
No, I think that's your observation and read of the literature is spot on, but I don't agree with it. I don't think VO2 max is as important as they make it out to be. I really don't. I think that's a mistake. I can't prove it yet, but I will probably.
Well, there is one study from a few years ago, UK Biobank, on 500,000 people, and they looked at the differences between beginner, intermediate, and high level of grip strength and cardiorespiratory fitness.
Mhm.
And they found that for grip strength, the benefits maximized at intermediate level, whereas the benefits on cardiorespiratory fitness were still evident with the high level as well. So you pretty much max out the benefits of strength training with intermediate level of strength. And with VO2 max and cardiorespiratory fitness, you can even gain more benefits by going to the elite level. Obviously, if you combine both of them, you have high cardiorespiratory fitness and high muscle strength or intermediate
Mhm.
muscle strength, then you can get the most benefits. But head to head, the high cardiorespiratory fitness gives more benefits than high muscle strength. So you
Mhm.
maximize the benefits from muscle strength by being at the intermediate level, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I wanted to pivot back to what you believe was the primary driver of longevity. And of course, it's having a youthful appearance, biological, not appearance, but a youthful metabolism
Mhm.
and biological characteristics. So the key is, how do you do that? And you were also mentioning that many people, we've already discussed how they don't believe that low protein is the way to go, but you suggested or implied that many people don't believe that's true for low calories. And I would mostly disagree with that. I think some people do for sure, but there's a large number of people, and we see them left and right, of people who are trying to lose weight and they lower their calories. And that is just a horrendous mistake because they think it's the calories in, calories out. And that is just so fatally flawed. It's not even funny because it's what that theory fails to integrate is that there's a metabolism going on here. There's a thermostat. And when you get less calories, your body doesn't want to die. So it shuts down your thermostat, turns down your thyroid, and essentially you burn less calories just to stay alive. It's a protective mechanism. And thank God we have it. But if you do that too long, you'll still gain weight on like half the calories.
Mm.
And then you won't have fuel to supply the repair and regenerative processes that your body requires to maintain youthful biology.
Mm. Right. Yeah. So that's a pretty common phenomenon that can happen in people who go on like very low calorie diets.
Mhm.
So there's this.
Not even very low. I
Mm.
mean, it could be 1,500, even 2,000. Some people, if you were to go on a 2,000 calorie diet, you'd have a real big problem, really big problem.
Well, I think I'm most days eating like 2,000 calories probably. Like,
Oh, you are?
yeah, probably.
Well, how tall are you? How tall are you? I would think you'd been up by 3,000 by now.
No, I mean like 5'11", I think is the conversion, 5'11", and
Interesting.
I weigh. Last time I weighed also like 77.5 kilograms, so that's something, yeah, 172 pounds or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm below 10% body fat right now. So to stay that lean, I would need to be eating slightly less calories. I might have some like some days where I'm eating more. So like the weekly average is still maybe like a slightly higher, but on like a daily basis, I'll eat 2,000, 2,200, 2,300, and on some other days I might like eat 3,000 calories as like a refeed day.
Yeah.
So I do believe that there are some from the for weight loss, it doesn't matter that much if you're staying some days low and some days high. It like matters over the course of weeks and months. But from a biological aging side, I believe like some periods of slightly lower energy intake and then super compensating for a refeed or something like that. I feel, at least based on how I've interpreted the literature, is a good way to go about it. So you're gaining the benefits of both. So you're not staying in this
Yeah.
starvation state. You're giving your body this energy and boosting your thyroid function, but at the same time, you don't want to be constantly oversupplying the engine either, if that makes sense. Like, I don't believe in like
Well,
over revving the engine on a daily basis.
well, that's what a lot of people believe, and I don't think that's accurate. I'll just offer you some counter information to consider. In my experience specifically, and I'm just curious. You said you were 10% body fat. What assay or test did you use to determine that? Was it a
uh,
bioimpedance?
DEXA scan.
Oh, DEXA scan. Interesting. Okay, so the DEXA scan is one way to do it. It's not typically recommended because of the high ionizing radiation exposure, but it is one way. And there are BIAs, bioimpedance assessments, that essentially sends a very small current of electricity through your system and can correlate that to DEXA scans, or an even better, more accurate way to measure body fat is MRIs. So, but that 10% by DEXA scan is pretty good for sure. So I use a bioimpedance measurement system called SECA, SECA, which is relatively inexpensive compared to most of the others, which run about 30,000. This is about a third the price, and it's correlated to MRI. All the rest use DEXA scans. And they also have important. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but an important part of the equation when they do your body fat assessment on DEXA, they have to get your height. And do you remember if they measured your height when you got your scan?
Yeah.
They did. They actually measured you?
Yeah.
That's good. That's really good because most of the people who do this do not measure your height because that is probably more important than your weight when you're entering the equation is your height. So you really need to get accurate within 1/8 of an inch. And the SECA does that. They have a laser scale that's accurate within 1/8 of an inch. So anyway, the reason for this side trip is that I have typically 3,000 to 3,500 calories per day. I'm a little bit taller than you, but not much, another inch. Maybe 2 inches. You're 5'11", I'm 5'6". And I have like 450 to 500 grams of carbs, and my body fat is 6%.
Mm.
So, it kind of goes against what you're saying with modulating the calories and the carbs to have a low body fat. And I think you probably have more. You're probably exercising more than I, or your activity level is higher. You're certainly in better shape because you're 40 years younger than me too.
Right.
But yeah, I used to be pretty good with some of the distance running, but now at 70, it's an issue. So anyway, what are your thoughts on what I just shared? Because I think my perception is that if you give your body the fuel, your body will regulate. I think it's really, really hard unless you have the wrong fuel types. Like if you're eating bad food, that's a non-starter. It's not going to work. You're going to kill yourself prematurely. I think it's all about eating the right foods, which is another discussion we'll talk about. But I think you can have healthy calories, healthy carbs, and actually lose considerable weight.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not.
Or not even weight. You can lose body fat, which is more important because it's not about the weight; it's body fat, visceral body fat.
Right. Yeah. So I haven't measured my food precisely, so I don't know exactly how many calories I'm eating, but probably.
Yeah, you might. I think you're eating more than you
Right.
believe.
Well, I did.
It's hard to imagine you eating 2,000 calories. That just doesn't
maybe.
compute.
Well, I did measure my resting metabolic rate as well when I was doing the DEXA, and my resting metabolic rate was 3,500. So I mean, it might.
Which makes sense, right?
Right.
Yeah, so 2,000, you're going to lose weight at 2,000. You're not going to be as healthy and as fit as you are.
Yeah. So I haven't measured my food.
I think you have not measured your food accurately, and that's fine. I'm not criticizing you for that. I just don't think you have. I think you're much closer to 3,000
right,
calories.
perhaps.
Yeah.
But to answer your point, then I do think that there are ways to lose weight by increasing your carbohydrate intake and losing body fat. Because I've experienced that myself as well when I was switching from different style of diets. But the key thing here in my experience that actually resulted in the body fat loss was resistance training. So I was adding resistance training at the same time. So my body was getting the signal I'm going to use those carbs for muscle growth and fat oxidation rather than fat storage. So it probably might have not worked if I was sedentary or not doing resistance training in that form. So I was just building muscle and losing fat at the same time by eating more carbohydrates.
It's a very good point because as anyone who studies knows that when you increase your muscle mass, as you and I both had done, you have an increase in what's called the glucose receptors or GLUT4 receptors on the outside of your muscle cells, and they're essentially a magnet for carbs, and they can suck in a lot of those carbs, and you don't get the glucose spikes as you would normally if you didn't have that.
Yeah, and the thing, so the interesting point here is that you could make the argument then that if you're eating a high carb diet that shuttles those carbs into the glycogen, then you're still in a calorie kind of semi-deficit because those carbohydrates aren't used as like energy storage. They're used for glycogen replenishment. So pushing it into a bucket, those carbs into a hole, that still creates a calorie deficit because those calories aren't used for energy storage, if that makes sense. But I mean, it just goes to show that there's more than just the calories that go into your mouth. There's also the how the body uses those calories. So is it using for muscle growth? Is it using it for glycogen replenishment? Or is it using it for fat accumulation?
Yeah, so we talked about I don't think, well, forget the fats because the, I think you don't want to go excessive in fats. And, a lot of people do on the low carb keto, they do that. They have much more than 40%. They're 60, 70, 80% fat. I think that's problematic because I totally agree with you. Your recommendation was 55 or what is it, 50 to 60% carbohydrates.
Yeah, so
What
the
you were saying?
studies find the optimal is like 45 to 55% of total calories,
Okay.
which is going to be
Yeah,
something
that's the
like,
right range.
100 to 250, 300 grams, depending on a person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and that's, most people don't believe, I think the majority of people don't believe that. There's this fear about carbohydrates, and it's understandable. With diabetes, pre-diabetes, what is it? It's elevated blood sugar. So you villainize the the consequence of it, but it's just an innocent bystander. It's kind of like accusing firemen of causing fires. They just show up every time there's a fire. That means firemen must be responsible. No, it's how your biology is able to process those calories. And if it's impaired, as is in most people, there's an interest. As I was putting my book together, Kate Shanahan, who's a real pioneer in leading the health community, understand the dangers of seed oils, and has come across some literature. I don't know if you've heard of this assessment for insulin resistance called HOMA-IR. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, I talk about it in my
Oh, you
book. Yeah.
have? Okay, good. I'm sorry, I didn't read your whole book. So, what's your take on HOMA-IRs? Because if you use that data, and she's looked at this, you can justify the NHANES most recent statistics that we're 99% of the population is insulin resistant. So, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think it's a useful marker to use for sure. Like just looking at your fasting blood sugar and making conclusions about diabetes is not like the most accurate way to go about it. Insulin alone as well can be, changed quite rapidly. So I like the hemoglobin A1C. That's a very good marker for like a longer time horizon for blood sugar levels, and not just a snapshot. And with the HOMA-IR, then I think it's also like a pretty useful marker for insulin sensitivity. So you want to look at multiple
Yeah.
markers.
Yeah, let me just explain what it is. What is it? It stands for homeostasis model assessment of insulin resistance. And it was discovered in 85. And what they did is they hooked up people to IVs, and they did this what's called a euglycemic and hyperglycemic glucose tolerance test. So they had insulin in one arm and the sugar going to the other, and they do all these careful calculations. I don't know what the specifics of it, but it's a long time. It takes hours, and obviously got IVs coming in probably multiple sites. And they do this very carefully. It's my understanding, it's a gold standard for measuring insulin resistance. There's no finer way to figure that out. But who's going to do that test? So they basically did that test, and they did the fasting insulin and the fasting glucose, and they did correlations, and they give you a simple number. Anyone can do this. You can figure out your HOMA-IR by just two simple tests, probably under $20. It's your fasting blood glucose, which you can do at home, and then a fasting insulin level, which is an inexpensive test. And you multiply those two numbers, and if you're in the US, you divide by 405. If you're in Europe like you, I think you divide by 22. And the number, if it's below 1, you're not insulin resistant. And the lucky less than 1% of the population does not have insulin resistance.
Yeah.
And almost everyone else. So the higher you are, the worse it is. So it's a really powerful, simple, inexpensive tool that people can use and find out exactly how metabolically sensitive or flexible or metabolically useful their biology is.
Yeah. And with this test, they're doing the glucose challenge, and like, so I guess the one big misconception about diabetes and blood sugar is that insulin is kind of the bad guy here, and you want to keep your insulin low. But the thing is that if you're ingesting this oral glucose challenge or whatever, a large amount of carbohydrates, then like the robust insulin response to that meal is actually a healthy thing, because it means your body is producing the insulin. In type 1 diabetes, your body isn't producing any insulin at all, so therefore your blood sugar level stays elevated. And with type 2 diabetes, the insulin isn't working properly to unlock the cells to let the glucose in. So like the insulin is not inherently like the bad guy. It's like producing a robust insulin response in response to a larger amount of glucose is a healthy thing. And recently they
Mm-hmm.
found, last year they found in one study, that the people who produced the greatest insulin response to a glucose challenge, those people had the lowest risk of metabolic disease in 10 years. So producing a lot of insulin isn't the problem. It's the insulin resistance that your blood sugar is elevated because of insulin not working properly.
Yeah. So have you had your fasting insulin measured recently?
Yeah, it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was like 88 or 89.
Oh yeah, you got that. You got. We can't compare them because you're using European units.
So
Oh, I
that
was hoping.
it's still in the low risk category. So that,
Oh, it's very low. I think I can't remember the conversion. It was 80. I'll have to look it up after this interview and see what the numbers show. Because I had mine done. Actually, it was pretty low. It was down to 1.2.
mhm.
That's I forget the units, but it's American units. Normally, anything below 3 is considered very good. So I got it down pretty low. Um, but that's a powerful test that people can use to see exactly where they are in the metabolic spectrum. So the danger is most people don't have enough carbohydrates, and that's the key. And I think that's a key for a number of reasons, because it's the optimal fuel for your mitochondria. It really isn't. There are certain cells that absolutely have to have fat. Your muscle cells, your heart cells, your colonocytes in your colon, they require beta oxidation. But the rest of the cells probably thrive on glucose, especially your brain. It's so important that if you don't have enough glucose, ideally stored in, actually, the muscles, the glycogen stored in your muscles is not used systemically. It's only in your liver. So it's great to store them in your muscles, but you got to have the glycogen in your liver if you're going to provide fuel to your brain. Your muscles won't work.
Right.
It's not released; it just stays in the muscles, used locally.
Yeah, I think
But
most, with all the foods, like my standpoint with foods and macronutrient ratios and stuff is, I think you should base it on your blood work. So there are short-term changes you need to make to your diet based on your blood work, and then there are long-term aspirations with your diet based on the blood work. So in the short term, someone might have pre-diabetes or insulin resistance. Then in the short term, it makes sense for them to maybe control the carbohydrate intake slightly to regain some of that insulin sensitivity. But chronic ketosis, chronic low carb, does impair long-term insulin sensitivity as well. So it depends a lot on the individual, like how many carbohydrates and what macros do they eat. But in the long term, like a healthy metabolism should be able to tolerate a few hundred, maybe 200 grams of
yeah,
carbs per day. And in the long term, you want to kind of, because healthy metabolism should be able to do it. So you're trying to uh, end to that point by you know improving your insulin sensitivity with exercise, weight loss, and eating the right diets, and eventually you'll be able to get there.
yeah, I think that you've accurately hit the nail on the head there. It's if they're healthy, and my uh, premise is that the vast majority of people, maybe perhaps as 99% of the population, is not. They're not metabolically healthy at all, and so the question becomes what contributes to that. And I think you mentioned 200 grams of carbs. I think most adults need at least 200, maybe 250 is the bare minimum. The bare minimum. If you're exercising like you or I, you got to be into the close to 400. Otherwise, you're just not going to have enough fuel. You just won't. Now you can survive, but you're going to run short, and your body has a very clever mechanism of compensating for that shortage, and that's activating your stress hormones like glucagon and insulin and adrenaline, and that sacrifices your muscle, contributing to sarcopenia, and it also has oxidative stress complications. It's not the most efficient way to fuel your body is to break down protein and create glucose. No bueno. So you want to make sure you have enough healthy carbs. But the problem is, and here's the problem, you accurately assess this, that many people's health does improve when they go low carb. I couldn't agree more. And there's a reason for it. Have you ever thought what that reason might be?
I think it probably has to do with thyroid and insulin sensitivity. So when we are young,
Well,
we could eat all the candy and stay fit and healthy. But with age, there are some changes in the metabolism because of unhealthier diets and this age-related accumulation of waste material that probably disrupts that, and that's a common reason why people, when they get older, their glucose tolerance decreases.
Well, I would disagree with that. I think the thyroid is a consequence. It's not the cause. The cause more likely is related to the target. And I believe one of the central reasons why most people are sick, because they have mitochondria. I think that the reason you optimize your longevity is when you increase your mitochondrial function. That fuels everything. If you don't have fuel, you cannot regenerate and repair. It's biologically impossible. And if you don't have enough fuel in your tank, it's just not going to work. So the problem is that we have these mitochondrial poisons. I think there's a few. Estrogen would be not estrogen receptor molecules, which are more generically called EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, things like plastics, microplastics, BPA, phthalates, industrial poisons like pesticides, fluoride molecules, PBDEs. There's a whole variety of them, but they're essentially activate your estrogen receptors. And then you've got seed oils, which are also causing a similar problem in EMFs. But what those do, when they destroy your mitochondrial function, ultimately they wind up creating high levels of reactive nitrogen species called peroxynitrite. And when that happens, they start killing your colon cell. And when the colon cells don't work, specifically the colonocytes, they don't work. These are cells that have beta oxidation. And one of the reasons they do that is because beta oxidation requires the use of oxygen, and they deplete the oxygen in your colon. They could create a very low to almost no oxygen environment if you are healthy, as I believe you are for the most part. You're one of the rare people who are healthy. But for most people, they don't. This mechanism to deplete oxygen in the colon is deactivated, and the oxygen levels build up, and you have a transition to unhealthy bacteria, pathogenic disease-causing bacteria, sometimes called oxygen tolerant or facultative anaerobes. And they have a very virulent endotoxin. And the endotoxin destroys your health even further. So the reason I believe that most people benefit from low-carb diets, benefit significantly. I mean, their life is turned around. I am not disputing the miraculous results people have from low-carb diets, but it's a short-term, it's short-sighted, and long-term, it's a disaster that will kill them prematurely, I believe, strongly. So, because when you're on low carb, you're not feeding those pathogenic bacteria, and they're not multiplying, reproducing, and producing endotoxin, which gets into your system and just destroys your health and contributes to autoimmune diseases and everything else. So that's why it helps. And then secondarily, that destruction and further loss of mitochondrial function is what destroys the thyroid. And there's other variables that estrogen could cause thyroid dysfunction too. So thyroid is clearly involved. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I don't think it's the causal factor. I think it's sort of an end target for all the pathology that's going on.
For sure. Yeah, there are gut dysbiosis is also one of the newest hallmarks of aging that they're recognizing. And
it's the emerging one, Siim. There's no question that is going to be the primary one. You've got to fix that. If you don't, it's almost, Siim, I figured that I created a term for it. It's like the black hole spiral of death, because it just gets worse and worse and worse unless you fix it. It's almost physiologically impossible to ever get healthy unless you fix that. You just can't get better.
Right.
Because it just gets worse and worse and worse. You never improve. Now you can maintain yourself, but you'll die prematurely as a result of that. That's what I believe. Right. The black hole spiral of death is a messed up microbiome.
Yeah, fortunately, improving your health and some aspects of weight loss and exercise themselves also have been found to improve gut health and the gut diversity. So there's many things you can start with, and maybe even just the small minor changes, changing your dietary, whichever direction that goes, even that small change can have a positive effect. And starting to exercise or changing some of the exercise, or sunlight and sleep, removing some of these environmental toxins from your life, all those things add up, and you need to start with some of the small changes and see how you respond, and those will already kind of mount up.
Well, I've got a good question for you, because we're in alignment with almost everything that we teach, and we virtually disagreed about nothing, which is unusual. in my experience. So I applaud your brilliance. The question becomes, though, I mean, we both are totally agree about exercise, and you mentioned sun. So I'd like you to, I think sun is one of the most important, probably pretty comparable to exercise. I think it's almost biologically impossible to be healthy if you don't have enough good sun exposure, which gives you a massive handicap because you live so far north. Estonia is where you live?
Right now, yeah.
Okay, so I thought. So what's your latitude up there? It's pretty high, 50, 60?
Yeah, well, we're on the same height as Sweden, so it's
Okay.
pretty high.
Yeah, so you have a massive handicap. You get a lot of sun in the summer, but still it's not, because of the latitude, you're just it's not that intense. So how do you compensate for this handicap? It's a serious handicap.
Right. Yeah.
And what I'm sure there's no doubt the answer you're going to give is probably the best that you could in your circumstances, and many people will benefit. I'm really curious what your answer is.
Yeah, so I think there is evidence that sun exposure is important for health, and if you look at Mediterranean countries, then they get more sun and they have higher life expectancy than Estonia. At the same, I've for the record, like I've never had a vitamin D deficiency from my blood works of getting pretty high amounts of sun in the summer, and I'm eating vitamin D foods in the winter and maybe taking a supplement if I'm getting on the lower end.
Well, what's your vitamin D levels? I know it's in nanomoles per liter, probably. So it's 2.5 times higher than the U.S. rates.
Right. I think I haven't measured it in the summer right now. I measured in February. I think it was.
Oh, that's the lowest it's going to be all year in February.
I guess it was something like 85 or something like that. I don't recall exactly. I can look it up quickly if you.
Okay, so that's 40. That's in the 30s, probably low 30s. For 4 nanograms per milliliter, so, which it's not ideal, but it's not deficient.
Right.
So that's pretty good considering you're not taking a supplement. If I was you, I'd probably do a supplement. But what's your strat? How do you get outside? How do you get sun exposure on your skin?
No,
tell us what you do.
68 nanograms per milliliter.
Okay, so that's even less because you're probably in the high 20s. That's low. That's too low.
Okay.
But so I mean, it's shocking that I mean, it's a big deal, and I'm not a fan of taking the oral vitamin D. I have not taken it in 15 years. Mm-hmm. So you know what my vitamin D level was just last week? It was, take a guess. It will go in nanomoles per liter.
Something.
It was almost 300.
Okay. Wow.
300. Yeah, it was 130 in nanograms per deciliter. But nanomoles per liter, I think, is 300. Wow. That's pretty high, and I didn't swallow any vitamin D. Now, one of the things you can do to enhance, especially in low vitamin D areas of the world like yours, is you can put lanolin on your skin. Especially for those who are concerned about photoaging, that's an appropriate concern because the sun can certainly accelerate photoaging. It does it because of all the seed oils people are eating, because it's the seed oils that cause the damage. It's not the sun, it's the seed oils. So lanolin can, what lanolin, lanolin is commercially was what is used to make vitamin D. You can put it on your skin, and if you get sun exposure, it will turn that lanolin into vitamin D and absorb it over your skin. Isn't that clever?
Wow.
Yeah, and it helps your skin. Especially the skin that's exposed to the sun, it's going to prevent drying your skin and cracks and fissures and things like that. So wrinkles. So it's simple, and it's not terribly expensive at all. You can get for $2, you can get like a month's worth.
Right. So I use like the red light therapy as well, so to get like some of the infrared light.
Yes.
Red light in the
and what frequencies are you using a red light?
610 to however it goes, like 750 nanometers.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that.
So near infrared too.
Yeah, I have the near infrared as well.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And that reverses a lot of damage. So I'm sorry, I kept on interrupting you. How are you compensating for because that is pretty low. I would encourage you to consider some remediative strategy to compensate, because that is a handicap. And actually, the cool thing about vitamin D, it's an anabolic steroid. It is an anabolic steroid. that if you have enough, it's going to be pretty similar to taking like things like testosterone. I mean, it has an anabolic. It will build muscle mass. There's no question it will.
Mm.
And
Are
if
you
you're
sure?
low, you're going to be hit.
I don't. Well, at least based on the reference ranges that I've seen, 68 nanograms per milliliter isn't like a deficiency. It's actually pretty high. Like
No nanograms. Were you giving? I thought you were giving me nanomoles.
no, nanograms.
Oh, I apologize. 68 is spectacular. I assumed it because you were in Estonia, it was nanomoles.
Right. Yeah. Well,
I was divided by 2.5, and then it was too low.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's like I was taking some.
I am so sorry. I misunderstood you.
No, that's fine. Yeah, like for sure, like 65 nanomoles, 68 nanomoles would be deficient. Yeah, but
that's deficient.
Yeah.
But not nanograms. That's like that's golden. As long as you're over 60, you're fine. That's why I was concerned about you, because I mean that didn't equate with you in health, because you're so healthy, and having be vitamin D deficient would be crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I usually like just use a supplement if I'm starting to see in the winter that I'm going low. I'll take it with K2, magnesium, and boron as well for the other
perfect
synergistic effects. But yeah, how do I counteract that? I am like, we're planning to move to Spain with my wife in a few months.
Ooh, really? Is that a permanent move?
We don't know. We're just going to go there for a few months initially and see how it goes. So she has like some mold issues from past earlier adulthood. So and Spain is like a lower mold than Estonia. So in Estonia, it's very moist and quite moldy. So that's the like primary reason we're going. And I guess the sunlight is also like a good change.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, but I mean, you can survive in the cold winters, but it's hard to thrive.
Yeah, well, it's
you can, but it's hard.
Interestingly, life expectancy in things like Iceland is super high. Like it's higher than.
Really? Yeah. Why do you think that is? You'd be really qualified to comment on that.
Well, it's. I'm going to check quickly the number of the life 83.12 is Iceland in 2021, and Norway is 83.16 as well. So. I think it's probably because of the wealth and affluence of these countries. So they're wealthy countries and they have good healthcare. So life expectancy is mostly about like healthcare in a lot of cases. And I haven't heard a lot of like centenarians, so maximum lifespan people from Norway or Iceland, but you do get a lot of people from like Spain and France and those kind of sunnier countries. So I think for the average person, they're not going to live shorter because of the lower sunlight, as long as they have good healthcare, in my opinion. The quality of life might be somewhat different. So interestingly, like Finland has the highest happiness in the world. So they're categorized as the happiest country in the world. And they're also pretty wealthy and affluent. But most Finns, at the same time, Finns also have the highest rates of like suicide or something like that. So it's kind of funny, how do you get the happiness and the highest suicide at the same time? So it's probably like related to sunlight or some depression side, that maybe the quality of life might not be the highest if you're in a darker country, but the life expectancy at least suggests that you're not going to live very short, even if you're in Iceland, which is like super dark.
Yeah. So you know what it is, the life expectancy is for the US?
It's starting to increase right now. For the last year, it's starting to take a U-turn, but it was like 79, I think, and now it's starting to increase slightly.
What's your take on the influences that the culture and the media have on longevity? Because it seems that their continuous promotion of products that is highly counterproductive to their health has some profoundly serious negative impacts.
I think, right now longevity is still looked upon as, in the mainstream, it's looked upon as something weird, or something that, okay, you have this Brian Johnson and other like rich people trying to live longer, like Peter Thiel and Jeff Bezos investing into these longevity startups. That I think, my perception is that that's the view of mainstream media on longevity as a field. Of course, they're starting to be more interested in it. So they're like, okay, there's actually some science. You can actually control your speed of biological aging. But there's a lot of also like misinformation, even from online, from different people who are, spreading some sort of information about longevity that's not maybe backed up by science or studies. So the mainstream media I don't think it has that much power in terms of the longevity right now. They're just more of like spectators of the field and trying to comment
Well,
on that.
I was really taking it from a different perspective. Not with respect to longevity promotion, but just promoting their own agenda, which is anti-longevity, not by design, but maybe by design. But the primary emphasis on convenience and processed foods and
Gotcha.
technologies like EMF, which is just absolutely not integrating the consequences on biology. So, from that perspective, because the other component is that longevity, it's not like we're trying to live as long as we can, although that's certainly a goal, but the consequence of living long is you have to be healthy, and healthy has the benefits. It's usually gets you free of pain, free of disease, and free of taking any medications. I think the average, these numbers are skewed, but the average person in the United States is taking, if you look at the number of prescriptions sold in the most recent year, it was over 6 billion prescriptions. We only have 330 million people. And if you do that number, that calculation, it's 19 prescriptions per year per person.
Wow.
19.
Wow.
So, most people are taking drugs, and that's by design. Over a century ago in the United States, we had Rockefeller, and he established Rockefeller medicine, which is a focus in essentially eliminating all of the natural medical strategies from medical schools and replacing them with pharmaceutical strategies. So that's a consequence. So it's those types of things, the absolute capture of the entire medical system by the pharmaceutical industry, and the teaching and the focus on drug-based solutions that only alleviate symptoms and do absolutely nothing ever to treat the foundational cause of the disease. So I think what you're doing in longevity medicine, anyone who's authentically interested in increasing longevity is seeking to focus on the reasons that keep you healthy, because they absolutely prevent disease. Because you can't have disease and health in the same place. It's like having light and dark. They don't coexist. You're either healthy or you're diseased.
Right.
So the focus on longevity is a focus on health, which I absolutely applaud your work. You've identified a lot of strategies, compiled so many of them in your book. over 500 pages. That's 2 normal books.
Yeah,
that's 2 normal books.
I covered like a lot of specific these chronic diseases. Like I have a full chapter on kidney disease, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, like 3 chapters on heart disease actually, neurodegeneration and inflammation. So I'm going into a lot of these, deep dives with a lot of these conditions, and full chapter on exercise, full chapter on sleep, and on nutrition, protein. So a lot of different chapters. That's why it's so long.
Yeah, so you've done a lot of deep dive research, and you're really good. I love many of the videos that you make. I put them up on my site in our articles, because they really, you're ahead of the curve in most areas. And I applaud your efforts for identifying glycine as a really important amino acid. Maybe we could touch on this for a moment too, because I think this is something that most people miss. We talked about protein requirements,
right,
but what I should have pivoted to was that I believe, and I suspect you do too, certainly with your endorsement of glycine, is that 1/3 of your protein should be collagen or connective tissue. And it's a foolish mistake not to do that, because you're 1/3 of your protein, 1/3 of your entire protein in your body is collagen. And if you don't give it those amino acids, they're not called essential because your body can make them, but they are conditional essential amino acids. That means your body can make it, but only a limited amount, very small amounts. And you bring this up in your work too. And if you're not getting them, and you can only make so much, then you're going to be deficient. So they should be essential, but they're not classified that way.
Yeah.
So and there's really no companies that actually provide these things, like hydroxyproline, even proline. We're putting together a collagen supplement, and we couldn't even find those amino acids because there's no demand for them. No one has recognized that these are important amino acids. So give us your take on the collagen, importance of collagen and protein and health in general.
Yeah, like exactly. The glycine is considered not essential, but that's because your body makes 3 grams of glycine per day. But those 3 grams would be used for things like glutathione and creatine synthesis. but then you have 12 grams of glycine for collagen turnover, like optimal collagen turnover. So you're still deficient in about, so like you might eat maybe 2 to 3 grams on an average diet, this kind of a regular diet, and then you're still deficient in 9 grams.
I think you're being very generous. My review of the statistics is somewhere between 0 and 1 gram of collagen that people are eating per day.
For sure.
0 to 1. Yeah, in the
on
US,
the standard American diet, it's like 1 gram probably. But
yeah, 100%. So you are radically deficient, and unless you're assiduous and understand this, that's why people get so many injuries when they work out. Because how can you possibly have healthy connective tissue if you don't have the raw material to make it? You can't.
Yeah, and the demand for collagen turnover could even be up to 36 grams. So we covered in our previous book with Dr. James, the collagen cure, and there's like 12 grams is the conservative estimate needed for collagen turnover, but that's presuming that the glycine has the same recycling rate as cysteine, which is 95%. But glycine could also have a recycling rate of 85%, so slightly lower. And in that case, you would need up to 36 grams of glycine for optimal collagen turnover. So they don't know exactly what is the recycling
well,
rate.
Well, that depends on your body mass too, right?
Right.
So a child's going to be different than an adult.
Yeah, exactly. But generally, yeah, like you would theoretically need like even like 30 grams of glycine per day, and there's no like harm to getting 30 to 50 grams, even like 90 grams of glycine per day hasn't been found to have like any.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. 90 grams of glycine. That's then you run into the same issue of having excessive protein.
For sure.
It's still an amino acid.
Yeah,
you have to excrete that. 90 grams is a lot. I mean, I don't know that anyone should ever take 90 grams of glycine.
But at least in the studies, they've shown that it has shown no negative side effects.
Now, yeah, I'm shocked they get the study approved past the IRB. Right. I don't. If I was on the IRB board, I wouldn't approve that study.
Right. Yeah. So but it's virtually impossible to reach that as well unless you're taking massive amounts of supplement. But yeah, like you definitely want to add like some collagen to your diet. There's also a lot of clinical trials in collagen peptides and skin anti-aging and reversal. So yeah, definitely a healthy source to add.
Do you shoot for a third of your protein as collagen?
Something like that. Yeah, I'm like. It also depends on how much methionine you're getting. So if you're eating less methionine, then your demand for glycine is also somewhat lower.
Yeah. So do you consciously restrict methionine and other amino acids like tryptophan and cysteine?
I don't deliberately restrict them. I'm compensating for that with increased glycine, if that makes sense. But I'm not.
Well, that's for methionine, but that glycine doesn't have anything to do with tryptophan and cysteine, which have also been negatively correlated with longevity.
Yeah. Well, I'm not.
Quite
I'm not eating a lot of muscle.
Actually, the correlation with tryptophan is actually more than calorie restriction.
Right. I'm not eating a lot of like muscle meat, which is where you get most of them. So I'm eating.
That's good. That's an interesting pearl. How much muscle meat do you eat?
I guess I'm eating maybe 200 grams every few days, or 200 grams once a week, twice a week, something like that.
Okay. That's good. I eat about 200 grams a week too. I have go through a pound of ground beef, which I think is one of the best meats because it has connective tissue in it, every 10 days.
Yeah, that's a good.
It's not a lot. It's like 3 ounces a day or every other day. 3 ounces every other day.
Yeah.
An ounce and a half a day on average. So that's enough to get some of the nutrients.
Yeah.
You don't want to stop. I think everyone should benefit from it, but you certainly don't need a lot of it.
Yeah.
Because of the methionine and other things, and you balance it with organ meats.
Yeah.
For sure.
Just enough is enough.
So I'm glad to hear you're not eating that much meat. That's fantastic. Yeah. I'm not surprised. You're so smart.
Right.
So your book is The Longevity Leap, and it's on sale now. And your website, why don't you give us your website and any social media platforms you have?
Yeah, so you can buy the book at thelongevityleap.com. So I decided to like print and ship it myself this time. And,
great.
Yeah, so that's going to be, you can order it from there and it will ship you the book. I'm Siim
Does
Land.
It ship from Europe? Does it ship from Europe or the US?
I have a warehouse in US and Europe, so both
good.
parts. And Siim Land on all the social media platforms.
Okay, Siim Land, Land.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Well, congratulations on an epic effort at compiling all this information. And I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you much.
Thanks so much for watching. Remember, hit the like and subscribe button so you can get more videos that can help you and your family take control of your health.